Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 21st Richard Jones Memorial Lecture. On behalf of the Lecture Committee, I'd like to extend a special welcome to my mother, Patsy Jones, and the other members of my father's family who are here tonight. We acknowledge and pay respect to the original and traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today, the Muanina people. Tonight, we are celebrating the legacy and life work of Dr. Richard Jones. My father was a man of great foresight, courage and conviction. He translated his knowledge and training as an ecologist into action to defend our planet's future, making an outstanding contribution to increasing environmental awareness. My father was a founder of the Tasmanian Environment Centre, now Sustainable Living Tasmania, and was its president at the time of his death in March 1986. He played a pivotal role in the campaign to save Lake Pedder from flooding in the 1970s and in the formation of the world's first environmentally based political party, the United Tasmania Group. My father also played a leading role in converting the Australian Conservation Foundation into one of Australia's most dynamic environmental organisations. In recognition of his work, he was made a life member of the ACF in 1982. My father's role in environmental academics was also substantial. He was instrumental in the foundation of the Centre for Environmental Studies at the University of Tasmania. He was its first director and held that position until his death. Under his guidance, the Centre pioneered problem-oriented, interdisciplinary environmental research to provide innovative and valuable ideas to the community. As you will all know, tonight's lecturer is Dr. Bob Brown. Bob will need little introduction to most of you, but tradition dictates that I say at least a few words. Bob moved to Tasmania from the mainland in the early 1970s. On arrival, he quickly fell in love with the state's natural beauty. This translated to action when he got involved in the Save Lake Pedder campaign, where he first met my father. That introduction to grassroots environmental politics was only the starting point for Bob. Later, he became much more prominent in the state's environmental affairs. As director of the Wilderness Society, Bob was one of the leaders of the campaign to save the Franklin River from being dammed in the early 1980s. On the back of that role, Bob was elected to the State Parliament in 1983. After 10 years of that, during which time he oversaw the creation of the Tasmanian Greens, Bob resigned to stand for election in the Australian Senate. Although initially unsuccessful, Bob was elected as a senator in 1996 on his second attempt. After almost 18 years, Bob stood down as a senator earlier this year. Notwithstanding his busy schedule as an elected politician, Bob has also found time to write and publish 9 books. Tonight, Bob's lecture is entitled Saving the Earth and Other Green Heresies. We've set aside some time for questions at the end of Bob's lecture, so please save them up for then. Would you all please welcome me now, join with me rather, now to welcome Dr. Bob Brown.
Thank you, Ken. Patsy, ladies and gentlemen, it's a ripper of a privilege to be here tonight to present the 21st Dick Jones Memorial Lecture because it's just an honour to be following in the footsteps of this great man. Chris Harries had a letter in today's Mercury which pretty well summed Dick up, but he was a seer, he was a visionary who could see what Tasmania had in front of it, and that is still being resisted by the old brigade, but it's on its way, and Tasmania's glory days are yet to come, but they'll come quicker because of Dick Jones. He contacted me directly after I wrote a letter to the Examiner newspaper in about 1974 saying that voting for the lesser of two evils was still voting for an evil. And he wanted to point out to this young Dr. Brown, whoever it was that wrote that letter, that there was a third option available, and that was the United Tasmania Group. Dick had stood with his foot on a rock in 1971 on the Central Plateau with a friend as the imminent flooding, or illegal flooding, of Lake Pedder National Park approached, and with not one member of the House of Assembly, the House of Government in Tasmania, opposing this travesty, and said we have no option but to establish another party. And so on March the 23rd, 1972, just 40 years ago this year, that first party was established. And it's a fact that the Hydroelectric Commission sent quite a lot of people along to take that meeting out as well. And when Dick proposed a motion as presiding from the front of the town hall that a new political party be established to oppose the destruction of Lake Pedder, and it had, of course, this wonderful suite of other policies, on the voices, that was howled down. Dick had the prescience to then call for a vote by hand, and by more than a two-thirds majority the audience voted to establish what we now know to be the world's first Greens party. And from that there's so much more. I can tell you that rather shyly, because I was terribly abashed in those days, I agreed to stand number 2 to Dick on the UTG's Senate ticket for 1975 to be a representative from the north of Tasmania. And so I did, and I campaigned as best I could. Combined, we got 1,227 votes statewide, just a little under half of 1% of the vote. And of that, Dick got 1,028 votes. And for the mathematicians amongst you, that leaves me with 199 statewide. I was musing with Paul as I was coming along tonight that I was so abashed and modest in those days that, of course, I hadn't voted for myself, I voted for Dick. Or I might have got the 200. Anyway, thank you, Dick. But he also came out to Riston Jail in January of, over Christmas, 1982, and in January 1983, where I was placed for having lurked, loitered or secreted. I'm not sure which of those things, but it was anyway, you couldn't lurk, loiter or secrete in the forests of the Franklin River, or Gordon River, and so quite a lot of us have been arrested. But Norm Sanders, the Democrat, the great Democrat, who's a great friend and still lives on the north coast of New South Wales and is going very well, ladies and gentlemen, resigned from the House of Assembly because of the mistreatment, the growing mistreatment of peaceful blockaders, and his seat became vacant, and I'd stood at the previous election, and I was out there at night. We had 14 hours in solitary confinement overnight, and the rest of the time wandering around talking with other prisoners. By the way, the prisoners loved us out there because we sang songs, you know, we're going to lurk, loiter and secrete, and so on, and other rounds to do with the Franklin blockade. And the warders loved us because Robin Gray had refused them a pay rise and the prison was half empty, and suddenly it was overflowing, and they were threatening a strike, so they got a pre-Christmas pay rise. So there was a fair deal of Christmas cheer out there. But this seat was vacant, and under the Hare Clark system, the question was whether I should stand or not, with the chance that I may, on a countback, it wasn't clear at all, win the seat. A countback means that Norm Sanders' votes would be taken out of the ball, and whoever got the most number 2s would win. And the Wilderness Society, bless them, wanted me, I was director of the Wilderness Society, not to go into Parliament. We had this massive campaign on and a blockade and they wanted me to stay in that position very sensibly. But the alternative visitor, and he came a number of times, was Dick Jones. And he said, Bob, we have got to change the way this democracy is malfunctioning. We've got to have representation in Parliament. Please take this opportunity to take a seat in the Parliament where you can speak up about the Franklin. So I tossed and turned for 14 hours a night, and in the end I put my hat in the ring and was elected into the House of Assembly on the 5th of January 1983, the day after I came out of jail. Thank you, Dick. And since then, well, here I am, many years down the line, having been able always to refer back to the new ethic which the United Tasmania Group produced well before that, and which is now the basis, actually, of the Global Greens Charter worldwide. So that was a great gift to my life, and everything I've done has been done in that way off the shoulders of Dr. Richard Jones. Now, of course, we have still got a world with arguably far greater problems than those that we were looking at back in 1972 and 73 with the destruction of Lake Pedder, which will be recovered during this century. Wait and see. Simply because by the way, if you want to read up on Lake Pedder, the new book by Peter Sims is available in the bookshops. It's a self-produced publication. It's full of wonderful pictures. It's called Lake Pedder, The Awakening. It's just been printed, and I recommend it to everybody if you want to catch up on the Lake Pedder campaign. Don't know what that was, but I've been used to doing this. You see, I was giving a talk on wilderness in the New South Wales, up in New South Wales at the Wilderness Conference the other day, and the New South Wales government's just introduced shooters into national parks. So I was thinking of going for a walk with Paul, and I was just practising for it. If you go walking in that under that new Liberal government in national parks in New South Wales. So I've had a bit of practice, and there we go. Lake Pedder, 69 megawatts, or variously 26 megawatts of power, whichever way you look at it, a tittle of power, which could be produced these days from a solar baseload power station, either here or on the mainland. And I fancy that there'll be enough citizens get together to produce, to build such a power station to free up Lake Pedder. Once the water's drained away from it, that basin will be there, and it'll be one of the great restorations globally. You may not know, but the Elwha River in Washington State, up beyond Seattle at the moment, is a scene of intense excitement by ecologists, because it is being restored with two bigger dams than those which flooded Lake Pedder. The first one has been removed, and the second one is being deconstructed at the moment and will be entirely removed. These are dams built in the 1920s to allow the salmon run back up the Elwha River. That salmon numbers down to less than 3% of what they were. And already they're finding from the removal of the lower dam a couple of years ago that the salmon are spawning in the gravel bit above the site of that dam. So there's intense excitement, and not least by the indigenous people of the Elwha Valley, that they're about to see this fabulous restoration. And there are 1,000 dams, most of them small, slated for deconstruction, removal in the United States at the moment. So we have, amongst other things, a period of ecological restoration coming down the line, which is perhaps the brighter side of a story about a planet which is this one. And Carl Sagan got that picture taken of the little blue planet from some millions of miles out in space by a satellite a couple of decades ago, and reminded us that on that little dot in the universe is everybody we love, is everything we enjoy, is every piece of creativity that inspires us, is every place that we have ever adventured, is all our history and indeed all our future on that one little dot in this phenomenal void of the universe. And that's this little planet Earth. And fellow Earthians, I say this with some trepidation, because when I spoke about it earlier in the year, the response and postulated that perhaps we are the only form of life and intelligence in the planet, because the hypothesis by scientists is that when life evolves to consciousness and self-awareness, and then the ability to manipulate the biosphere upon which it depends, it wrecks it, and self-extinction is a part of the progress. Now, if that's the case, I think we should map planet Earth out as an exception. But this is a reason given for why we're not being contacted by earlier lively and thinking planets. There's billions of them out there, ladies and gentlemen. Why aren't we being contacted? Why isn't there any conversation? The reason may be that there is this trajectory built into the evolution of life that is self-destructive. I was speaking about this matter, brought these comments from various people in the Murdoch media. About yours truly, Bob Brown. Extravagantly absurd, vulgar theatre, wrote Alan Howe in the Herald Sun. This is crazy stuff, isn't it? Said John Fain, who was going to interview me tomorrow, but I'm in Melbourne. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Unreason and intolerance. To speak about scientific speculation of life elsewhere in the universe. Said that great modern philosopher and thinker Andrew Bolt in Murdoch's Telegraph. Ravings, said Chris Kenny, also in the Australian. This is from Patrick Carline of that great journal, the Herald Sun in Melbourne. He is known to detest the Murdoch press. Strange, he sounded like a latter-day John Lennon. Oh, that hurt. Loopy, barking mad, etc., etc. Well, I think it's time we did think a little bit about the fact that we have taken ourselves charge of the biosphere. And we are a big herd of mammals on a finite planet. And as businessman Dick Smith has recently, and is continuing to go around the country, discovered and is saying to politicians and journalists who don't want to hear it, you cannot have exponential growth of anything in a finite system. And we have developed in a religious fashion a materialism which is predicated on growth in the economy. If we say the economy isn't growing, or worse still for 2 quarters, that means 6 months, it's in reversal, we all get depressed. We go into a recession and then into a depression. This is the terminology that's used. I was just down in the gents, ladies and gentlemen, and I see there you can sign up. UTAS supports this amongst others, to learn how to market, to jump the queue, to become a better marketer. And right next to that is a sign telling you how to cope with depression. And I don't know whether this is some logical progression, but I'll come back to depression shortly. I'm using it now in the economic term. And many of you here will remember, after Jonathan Porritt giving the first Dick Jones Memorial Lecture back in 1987, along came David Suzuki, and his very simple asseveration about us was when he drove to the supermarket in Vancouver and they had a new sign in the window saying animals not allowed inside. So he got back in his car and drove to a place where he could go shopping. Because we so easily forget that we are part of the living fabric of this planet. We are animals, and we are mammals, and we are very slightly genetically differentiated. And yes, we have an awareness and an intelligence and an ability to manipulate things like no other creature ever has. We're not the biggest. Indeed, I'll come back to the biggest in a little while, but it's worth to mention in passing that the dinosaurs were the biggest land mammals, and they went to extinction when a big rock crashed into the Yucatan Peninsula or nearby some 65 million years ago. And a repeat of that event, I am told, would have us here in Hobart 3 days later witnessing 700 degrees centigrade. So no wonder the dinosaurs couldn't stand it. And they rapidly went to extinction, but down in a hole in the ground somewhere or other was this third little furry thing, a bit like a mouse or a rat, and we're all descended from that. It came out, it found the dinosaurs weren't there, and it got the jump. And it got the precedence on the planet, and here we are, ladies and gentlemen. But we don't act as if we have learnt anything from what has happened to the planet in the past, or indeed what has happened to previous civilizations. And the recorded history is a very, very brief part of our human time on this planet. It's just the last flick of an eyelid. But it's full of the authorities refusing to take notice of emerging problems for them and their societies, and what's more, doing terrible things to people who said, hey, we have a problem, or here's what we should do to fix it. And my little book on Earth, called Earth, which I dedicated to Hypatia, because I don't know, I haven't seen the film, but since then a film's come out about this remarkable woman in 400 AD in Alexandria. Now, she happened to choose the profession of being a mathematician as well, and a philosopher. And she was a critic of the emerging Christian conflict about what action she subscribed to the teachings of Christ, but the embellishments which were coming on his life and existence, she didn't. And she was very clear, and the bishop, Cyril, Saint Cyril nowadays, didn't like this very much. And I can shortcut the story by saying that Hypatia, who drew crowds to her remarkable talks on our existence on the planet, was dragged to up the streets of Alexandria by St. Cyril's myrmidons, his priestly gentlemen dressed in black, and cut to pieces with razors, namely broken up tiles where even the flesh was shredded from her bones. And as Bertrand Russell, who introduced me to Hypatia in his book, A History of Western Democracy, he strayed a little east to Alexandria, commented in that book from the 1970s, thereafter Hypatia's assassination, mathematics and philosophy were dead for many centuries to come, particularly in the Western world. And then there's Bruno Giordano, who went out of Italy on a trip around. He was a bit troubled by the narrowness of the thinking of his age. We move forward 12 centuries to 1600, and he travelled extensively around Europe, including sojourns at both Cambridge and Oxford universities. And he came up to a dazzling conclusion that the sun wasn't actually the Earth wasn't actually the centre of the galaxy or the universe. The sun was certainly the centre of this galaxy. Now, for that piece of thinking, he was grabbed, tortured, tied to a stake just over from the Vatican and burnt slowly to death in 1600 in central Rome. And so it goes down the line. And I often say to folk that the suffragettes suffered a great deal because they had an idea of equality, that women should get the vote. And what we forget so readily about those remarkable women in this country and elsewhere, but particularly, of course, the struggle in Britain, where the vote wasn't given to women until 1932, and we're talking about people who are in revolution, women who are getting out of their comfort zone and deciding this was a principle they weren't going to turn their back on in the 1890s and early into the last century. They were arrested. Emily Davidson, as you might know, ran in front of the racehorses at Royal Ascot or wherever and was killed. But those who were arrested went on a hunger campaign in jail and had stomach pumps applied to them. And they didn't, because the First World War intervened, they didn't live to see what we all now appreciate is a remarkable breakthrough, equality for women, based on one person, one vote, one value. But let's look at the situation that the planet's in, and I'm not going to dwell on this because we all know about it. Potential 6 degrees centigrade heating this century. 2 degrees if we want to be conservative about it. That translates, according to great economists, into a 20% hit, potentially, on the wealth of our grandkids. We could stop that now for a 2% diversion of our own wealth. We would stop global warming in its tracks. But we're not going to do it, and that is the cost that will be on our grandchildren. We've watched the alarming news about the Arctic melting in the last couple of weeks, and yesterday the added news about the Great Barrier Reef, which is potentially a third destroyed already, but much more to come and more rapidly, largely because of the impact of both drainage of chemicals but also climate change a la us. And do we want to know about this? Well, the response to this from Campbell Newman, that great product of Tasmania, who's gone to govern over the fortunate people of Queensland, is that we should put our foot on the accelerator. There's only one mega coal port being built at the moment, and actually it's for gas, at Gladstone. I've been there, I've been to the fishing co-op, I've seen the shovel-nosed shark with all the peat blotches on it from the chemical disruption of the World Heritage environment from which it was hauled, and the fishermen coming back saying, well, we went out and had another test fish today and we cannot send any of our fish to the market because dredging to bring super tankers into Gladstone Harbour onto an island in the World Heritage area has created such havoc there that the fishing industry is effectively finito, or was when I was up there a couple of months ago. That's one port being built to facilitate the 42,000 wells for coal seam gas that it's intended to drive into just the Darling Downs in this next 20 to 30 years, one of the richest food growing areas on the planet, to make money largely for already very, very wealthy people. It'll be processed in Gladstone, put in super tankers and sent to, well, who knows where. One's not enough. They have 6 on the drawing board. The biggest coal export port on earth at the moment is Newcastle. It's about to lose it to Mackay, which is about to lose it to Abbott Point near Townsville. And any of the 3 current coal mines being proposed by Clive Palmer, I'll come back to him in a moment, Gina Reinhardt, or a very wealthy investor from India, is going to produce, when that coal is burnt overseas, more greenhouse gases. Each one of these, not all together, but each one of them, and there's 20 of such mines currently on the drawing board in Queensland, each one of them will produce more greenhouse gases than the whole of the current Queensland economy, including its coal-fired power stations, its transport systems, its farming, its industry, the whole lot. But we don't count it as being a problem. This intelligent, self-regulating awareness, consciousness that we are, we don't count that because it's been burnt over there. As if that atmosphere isn't our atmosphere. Because there's money to be made out of it, and it's going to give us growth. And if we don't have growth, we're in trouble. I was amazed when David Suzuki said we have to pull our belts in, talking about growth, in this hall in 1987, and the crowd clapped. And I think he was amazed too. Because it's not to be spoken about, but it must be discussed, because we are so rapidly exploiting the finite resources of the planet, and that includes the atmosphere and the oceans, that we know, our intelligence tells us that we're into a massive meltdown of sustainability of life, and as some scientists are now saying, the population at the end of this century may well not be 10 billion, as is projected by the United Nations, and then it's going to slowly level off and slowly diminish. It may be 1 billion. And one of the reasons for that, a key reason, is what Obama, who had his debate this morning, has said during this first presidency, that perhaps the greatest threat stalking humanity is nuclear weaponry, and we must deal with it. There are still thousands of nuclear weapons out there, but here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. The technology is there regardless of how we harness in those weapons. And Al-Qaeda, for whom John Howard supported George W. Bush and Mr. Blair in going into Afghanistan and then crazily into Iraq, Al-Qaeda wants and is trying very hard through the internet and elsewise to get the technology for nuclear weaponry, and that these days means a handbag-sized nuclear weapon, and imagine what that will do if parked in one of our great cities. I see in the current Guardian Weekly, by the way, that Los Alamos and the other two places most directly involved in producing the first nuclear bombs to be dropped on people, and they killed 200,000 people in Japan, are about to be declared national monuments in the United States, national parks, no less, these three nuclear places where the bombs were developed and exploded, so that we can memorialise the splendour of our human wherewithal in this century. But we have a president who will no doubt sign off on those parks, who's also saying this is the most dangerous, the greatest danger stalking humankind at the moment. There are a number of other dangers. We don't have to expand upon them. What's the solution to this? Well, a key solution to it is global democracy. And I'm sure if Richard Jones were here, we'd be having a great nodding of heads about this, because he knew that we all have to live together. And you can't live together if you don't meet on the great problems that divide you and talk them through. And the idea of global democracy, as I pointed out a number of times earlier, goes back to the dawn of recorded history. And Socrates said, I'm not an Athenian, I'm not a Greek, I'm a citizen of the earth. And since then there have been people saying, using that sentiment all the way down the line, and Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address says that this horror of war must be fought, lest democracy be removed from the face of the earth. And we have had an absolute rash of ideas about how to get ourselves together to sort out our problems, although the first global conference on peace in 1843 in the UK, I think it was in Birmingham, was accompanied by a rash of outrage in the media that you could be so wacky, absurd and whatever else to have an idea that we should all live together in peace, or could all live together in peace. But indeed we must. And so the idea of global democracy is one whose time has come. After the Second World War, 22 states in the US passed motions supporting global governance. Opinion polls in both the US and Europe, though not here, had a majority of people supporting global government. But to talk about it now is as if you want to hand away your national sovereignty. And of course that's not what it's about. It is about having us able to rein in the common threats to humanity, like nuclear weapons, like the gap between rich and poor, like the obscene wealth through the transfer of money in unproductive finance houses making billions at the expense of the rest of the planet, and so many other issues which we have to deal with, and we have anyway, international trade and other treaties, and indeed a world court or two these days. The one thing we don't have is a parliament, a global parliament, and that's where we must be going. But it's a heresy to talk about that, as the quotes in the Murdoch media show. Even though it's blinding common sense that that's the way we shall have to go if we are going to make it in an age of ever-increasing technology for the bad as well as the good, because it's powerful technology. And we must commonly get together to curb such technology and keep it safe. That's what nations do. That's why we have police forces. That's why we have court systems. That's why we have elected governments to enact the laws that are in the common good. And what works at that level, as 6 colonies here found in the 1880s and converted into a federation in 1901, is going to be important for the whole of the planet as we go further down this century. And so that's an absolute debating point that you're going to hear a lot more about, ladies and gentlemen, in the future. Of course, we've got the United Nations, but it's representative and it's not elected. And I'm going to, in my post-retirement days, be talking about this quite a lot as I go around. Well, there's quite a lot of other things as well. Paul and I were up at Cradle Mountain on Saturday. We saw there was a snow dump coming. So I got in the car and drove to Cradle Mountain, as we're able to do, and the snow dump came. And it was a whiteout up there, effectively. Fabulous on Saturday. No transport up to Dove Lake. So Paul says, well, why don't we walk up there? And I thought, well, why don't we? So we did, in the snow and big blobs of it dropping down off the trees as we went, long before the snowplows opened the road to a few 4-wheel drives later in the afternoon. And what a fabulous thing to be up there on Dove Lake. We stood on Glacier Rock, you know, just round there to the left as you look at Cradle Mountain, and had to rapidly sit down because we were in danger of being blown off and into the lake. And up under the little horn, is it called up there? It looks like the Matterhorn, that piece on the left of Cradle Mountain. There were whirligigs or tornadoes of snow being ripped off the side of the mountain and spinning out into space, and the same along the top of Mount Campbell over us. What a no pictures really, I got one or two, but you know. But what a fabulous experience. And we went back to Liffey that night. The roads had been ploughed, and woke in the morning to find snow down on the western tiers to 400 metres, and what a fabulous place we live in. I've got a new OMD Olympus camera, and it cost $1,500, and it's just stunning. This camera technology is incredible. The definition, and I haven't got a picture to show you of the whales, we're going to see them in a moment, but whale out there 2 or 3 kilometres, take a picture of it breaching and you can bring it up to take up full picture absolutely sharply. It's got a macro on it as well. Paul wouldn't let me have the $22,000 variety. And I was at a fundraiser for the Greens in Melbourne last night and was explaining that the bad news was that I'd got the $1,500 camera. The good news was that he wouldn't let me have the $22,000 one. So somewhere in the middle of that, although we've got our eye on that piece of marshland that we'd like to put money in to protect as well, somewhere in the middle of that, why protect marshland next to the ocean if we don't stop global warming? It's going to go. Wouldn't it be better to donate, sorry ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about a Greens fundraiser last night in Melbourne, so forgive me for being slightly political for a moment. Wouldn't it be better to give money to the Greens than to put it into buying something that's going to be swallowed up by a lack of action on climate change? Anyway, we'll have a discussion about that. No doubt Paul's up there taking notes at the moment. The important thing about this was that I was able to tell them that we didn't need to raise funds for the Greens. Because in the run to the Queensland election, Clive Palmer, I told you I'd get back to him, announced that the Greens, Dick would have loved to have got this piece of information, were being funded by the CIA. So I said, we don't need you, we've potential givers, we're going to... Anyway, I rang the American Embassy to speak to Jeffrey Blythe, the ambassador, who I'd met on a number of occasions, but he was home in Texas. So the Chief Secretary, a very nice fellow called Bruce, was there, and I said to him, he said, "Oh, Senator Brown, how are you?" And I said, "I'm very well, thank you." I said, "I've just heard on the news about the money being sent off from the CIA, and I've got a problem." And he said, "Oh, Senator Brown, what's that?" I said, "It's not arriving at this end." And he said, "Oh, well, I think there could be some misunderstanding here." I said, "Look, it's come from one of the persons who knows most about money in Australia. Clive Palmer himself has said this. Would you check?" Well, disappointingly enough, within an hour, the CIA in Washington issued a press release saying they're not funding the Australian Greens. So, you know, one minute you're hired, the next minute you're left dumped. But the point there is, all of us have got to do a little, me included, of course, have got to do a little bit more to get out of our comfort zones in whatever way we can, to fund, to become active with, to support, and to get in with those people who are in their various ways endeavouring to save the planet. And I want to talk about one or two of those. Firstly, you have this brochure on the Tarkine on your seats. Now that was hastily printed off today just to acquaint you with the fact that when that grandest of temperate rainforests in the nation was protected, inverted commas, in 2004, after the stoush between Mark Latham and John Howard, and John Howard said he'll protect the Tarkine rainforests, which Latham was going to protect and give 800 million to Tasmania as well. John Howard was going to protect and give 250 million to Tasmania, so Tasmanians voted for John Howard. Nevertheless, those forests, though not the Florentine, which was promised for protection as well, were stopped from logging. Small hitch. They haven't been put into National Park. and they haven't been given the World Heritage status they deserve. I mean, this is the preserve of the largest freshwater crayfish on the planet, metre long. This is where you find fossils of giant extinct insects that are just stunning. This is the province of the Takana people and Aboriginal. I was looking at Patsy Jones' wall of the photo I took when Paul and I were on that coast recently of an Aboriginal hut site. And Robinson describes on the coast a hut there in the 1830 that had a porch out the front, a living room, kitchen and sleeping area over here. It's being driven through by trail drive off-road vehicles at the moment. We care so much about one of the most stunning pieces of human history in our own state. The great forests, the wildlife, the bailiwick of the Tasmanian devil, so much more. Well, it's now under dozens of mining applications. And open cut mining is now slated. The Minister for the Environment in Canberra has rescinded Australian Heritage emergency listing for the Tarkine. He's ripped that off. The mining industry, and the first one I cab off the rank, has its headquarters in Perth, Western Australia, is on the way. And there's minerals to be dug up there, they think, although this has been coned over for centuries. And with that, they'll only need, they say, 1% of the Tarkine. That's all that will be occupied by the mines and the roads and the infrastructure. And that's exactly what they said about the Franklin River some 30 years ago. It's exactly what they say about every place that's about to be despoiled. That's why the environmentalists talk about, yes, it's like a scratch on a Beethoven record. It does something terrible to the whole when you assault it with this so-called marginal impact. And the folk up there, they know what they're doing. They're determined to defend this area that we thought was protected in 2004, and we are charged to do what we can to protect this greatest of Australian temperate rainforests, threatened immediately. And the Wilderness Society was out there with the Tarkine group just a couple of weeks ago with a banner drop immediately in the coming summer. And I saw that the Tarkine has this stunning scenery. I know it's got those fabulous wildlife. I know it's got that magnificent human heritage. But when I saw that they were actually, the Tarkine defenders were prepared to go and put themselves in the way of the destruction of this Tarkine wilderness and asked me during the week if I'd be patron of their organisation, I said yes I would, because it's so important that we make a stand against such a prodigiously stupid despoliation of such a phenomenally valuable part of our living heritage and environment in our own state. Now, I was up recently at the other end of the country, in the Kimberley, and I had been up there with the Galarabaloo people on the coast of the Kimberley, 60 kilometres north of Broome. It's pinned down, it's red, there's that middle panel there. The soil is, and the cliffs are there. You'll see in this short film that we're going to have a look, Vishnu, in a moment, thank you. You can come and get ready to press the button. I'll just say a few more things. And one of the extraordinary things about this, which really made me think, was the Philip Rowe and Richard, two of the Aboriginal gentlemen there. They took me to see where the stone tools are still being made. I couldn't go and see the birthing place where the women have, it's still there, it's the labour ward further along the beach. But they explained, and I introduced this in a way, I simplify it too much, that the emu man came down out of the sky, landed on that coast, and named it and gave the law to the people, and has gone back into the sky, and you can see the Emu Man there. It's the dark bits in amongst the stars. What we call the coal sack next to the Southern Cross is the Emu Man's head, and you can see one wing out and the other one down, and it takes up a quarter of the sky. And it's so compelling that now I've been up there with the Gallara Blue people, when I look at the Southern Cross I now see the Emu Man. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because there's a program catalyst on this tonight, as some of you will have noticed, about the dinosaur footprints on this coast. But first, let's have a look at the trip with Sea Shepherd up to look at the biggest whale nursery, humpback whale nursery on Earth. Thank you.
Western Australia, way up north, is this wonderful area called Kimberley. It's a almost completely pristine environment. It's completely untouched by human development. In the western part of that is a massive humpback whale calving ground. It's the biggest one in the world. Right at this location, a big Australian company called Woodside, along with multinational partners and the West Australian government, is proposing a mega gas facility, the second biggest in the world so far, and a massive international seaport which will very much displace those whales, pollute their waters, and introduce thousands of ship movements every year with all of the dangers to life that brings. Sea Shepherd's purpose here would be to show people directly what all of us would lose if Woodside's project were to proceed.
Sitting in a small boat and have the mother whale come up and down straight towards the boat and then go around the end of it, and her calf bringing its tail over. That's an experience I'll take with me for every day of the rest of my life. Seeing the whales today, again, off James Price Point, mothers, babies, bull whales, seeing the count going up into the thousands of these whales, the assurance that they'd be okay with a megaport, with mega gas ships, with a huge factory ashore, is now clearly proven wrong. Whale nursery's been intact and unscathed by modern industrial development. It should be kept free. This nursery can't go somewhere else, but that gas factory can.
Since departing the Kimberley coast, we've certainly seen a much higher profile for the issue in the press. So for the first time, the status of the Kimberley coast is a talking point, and it's something that we're aware of throughout the country. It's become a national concern.
A couple of reality checks on why this should be a win-win situation. This is a $45 billion gas factory, the size of the city suburb, to be built ashore with a port which will have a breakwater going out through that whale calving, that nursery, 2.5 kilometres. And beyond that, they're digging a ditch 6 kilometres long and 300 metres wide to facilitate 1,500 super gas tankers a year coming in with all the attendant pilot vessels and so on, right through the whale nursery to take the gas offshore. None of it's going to be sold in Australia. And the digging of the ditch will produce 34 million tonnes of mud, which is going to be taken out further to sea and dumped in Commonwealth waters, which are a national whale sanctuary. And the scientists up there tell me that the first mega cyclone will redistribute that mud over 300 square kilometres of seagrass, upon which dugongs, turtles, dolphins, the whole spectrum of life lives. And as if that isn't bad enough, the studies by independent global banking analysts is that if the gas factory were to be moved south to the Pilbara, where Woodside already has processing facilities, it would save the corporation, which has shares in it by Shell and BP and BHP and Mitsui and Mitsubishi, it would save the corporation $15 billion. So they'd save $15 billion, the whale nursery would be protected. What's going on here? Well, the Premier of Western Australia, Colin Barnett, has said you are going to build it there. Because he, although he won't say this, wants a port for later uranium and coal and bauxite exports turning the Kimberley. This is Eric Rees wanting to turn the Tamar into the Ruhr. 40, 50 years later in Perth wanting to turn the Kimberley into an industrialised zone. And he's the Liberal Premier of Western Australia. And in Canberra, the Labor Minister for Energy, Martin Ferguson, saying if you want to keep your lease, this is to Woodside, you must build the gas factory there. So the corporation would be better moving it, the nation's heritage would be better moving it, but those two politicians say you're going to put it there and they need to be tackled. And with that in mind, I'll be going back to Melbourne bright and early in the morning. There's an ABC 24 interview at 8:30 or something like that, and we're showing a film, a longer film on the Kimberley and work that the Sea Shepherd's doing in the Galapagos at the Nova Theatre in Carlton later in the day. There will be also the Wilderness Society's organising a protest outside either BHP, I think it is BHP or BP tomorrow, and tomorrow night a mega concert in, to which I'm going but not singing, in the Federation Square. So tell any folk you know over there about it. It starts at 7:30, John Butler, Missy Higgins, and a lot of other people, and I'll be talking a little bit about the whales over there in Melbourne. Because, ladies and gentlemen, just like we had to go beyond Bass Strait to save the Franklin, the nation had to get to know about it. This news of this disaster off the Kimberley has to move east of the Nullarbor, and we have to return the compliment. Over 50 people came from Western Australia to join the Franklin blockade. Perth was galvanised. Peter Robertson and Margaret Robertson, all the way across. He rode his bicycle as an 18-year-old over here. He's now trying to help head up the Wilderness Society's effort to save the Kimberley, and we've got to go back and help them against this outrageous proposal. Which brings me to the dinosaurs, because the dinosaur footprints are up the coastline, right central to where this gas factory is going, dating back 135 million years. And there's a three-toed dinosaur in our scientific lingo which walked in amongst this, and that's the emu print that gives rise, in the science of the indigenous, much more indigenous, ancient explanation of these prints of the Galaragaloo people, to the evidence that the emu man came down and walked along this coast. And that is a songline story that goes across to Uluru and up to the north of Australia. Indeed, all these stories are interlinked, from the Sunshine Coast, which we are on here, to the Sunrise Coast, to the Sunset Coast over there. And we don't know the half of it, but this is a living law of the Gallarabulu people and other people over there, which is about to have a gas factory built across the middle of it, let alone the whale nursery. And tonight on Catalyst, they're revealing that a giant dinosaur, herbivore, trod on that piece of coastline, which it turns out is the biggest so far known animal ever to move on the land of this planet. And they have a new print, their one footprint, which is with the claws at the end, embedded in the rock there from 100, which is 192 centimetres across, 1.92 metres across. A little further than I'm reaching at the moment, one footprint. And these footprints, and I've seen them, they were up to 1.4 metres when I was there, they measuring them, are up the coast, where this great animal, more than 30 metres long, moved through the then swamp. And it's there, it's part of our history. And they're going to put a gas factory across the middle of it. And there's so much more. Those dolphins that you saw in the front of that ship are snub-nosed dolphins. And they're quite rare. And they're threatened. There's so much else. What about one orange-bellied parrot found on the mainland in the migration season this year? Our orange-bellied parrot down to one. I ask anybody who can to contact the Conditional Minister for the Environment, Mr. Burke, Tony Burke, up in Canberra, and say, what on earth are you doing with the Kimberley? Why didn't you, when you listed the Kimberley as Australian heritage, why did you leave out this piece of coastline where this factory's going? Do you know he's in Tasmania at the moment? Do you know the Prime Minister's here at the moment? And they're going to come and go without us uttering a word because we don't know about it, about this Kimberley coast. And you know what else? In December, we're now in October, November, December, Julia Gillard is meeting with the Premiers and the Chief Ministers at a COAG, Council of Australian Governments meeting, to get rid of green tape in Australia. They're actually going to emasculate the feeble law that the Conditional Minister for the Environment administers at the moment, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. And they're going to hand back to the states the power to determine the fate of threatened species in this country. We're going back to pre-Whitlam, 1971. And who's doing anything about it? A poll yesterday from ACF showed that 85% of Australians don't want that. Didn't get any coverage in the... Oh, mind you, I didn't get to read the Mercury today. Didn't get any coverage in the Mercury that I know of. We had a great day, I must tell you. I left Melbourne very early this morning to fly into Hobart. And we went out, the captain said I was going to be a bit bumpy down there, they've got some winds. And we went out over Dodgers Ferry. Well, you ought to have seen it. The causeway across there from Midway Point. You know, it was wet and the waves were... Anyway, we came in for a landing and it was shuddering and carrying on. And we got just onto the airstrip. You know, when you see the white squares and you fly over that and you know the bump's coming. And the plane drifted off over onto the paddock and he roared the motors and up we went again. There was stony silence on the plane. And sometime later over the Central Plateau where we wondered what on earth was happening here now, so we were on our way back to Melbourne. But a bit later we tried again, different set of great people on these Virgin flights. The same happened to a Qantas flight, I might add. This time we got round later this afternoon and came in for the ditto landing. And this time, as we were coming across those sand dunes at 7 Mile Beach, I could have done it without it. A couple of younger people up the back screamed as this bumping. But we hit the deck okay, and here I am. And it was like being in South America because the whole of the crowd on this plane broke out clapping. So welcome back to Tasmania. That was a bit of fun. And but to go back to nature, yes, it's very powerful, and it can do without us, although we can't do without it. And there are serious things happening in this country. And I just say to people who, and Dick would want me to say this, if you want to see Tasmania's forests, including the Tarkine, cut down, you know, Miranda's up in her tree tonight. Thank you, Miranda. Fabulous, Miranda defending us. But if you want the Tarkine protected from being dug up, if you don't want that to happen, if you don't want this gas factory, if you don't want 6 mega coal ports inside, if you want the Murray-Darling Basin not to be dried up by Syrian climate change project, 90% loss of productivity this century, according to the scientists. And the Conditional Minister for the Environment, Tony Burke's going to return half of the flow required minimally to give the ecology of that river a chance, half, maximum, then take off 1.6 million megalitres, which is going to allow to be extracted out of the basins next to it, so that takes us down to a quarter. You can't vote for them. If you vote Labor or Liberal, that's what you get. And we can't go to a ballot box and say, oh, well, it was other things, without you are putting a stamp of approval on that behaviour. That's where we're at in 2012. And that's what Dr. Richard Jones would want me to be saying here, because that's what he was saying to audiences in the 1970s, when this young fellow, very shy fellow, sat there listening enthralled. He took it up, and he didn't mix words. And he said what he meant, and he meant what he said. And it's time we woke up to that and followed through on it. So, ladies and gentlemen, we in Tasmania have the honour, through Dick Jones, of having the world's first Greens Party. I had to write to the Sydney Morning Herald this week and correct their editorial, which said, wasn't a very positive editorial, which said that I was the first elected Green in the world, and point out, no, that was Daniel Berlitz in Switzerland in 1979. But we here are a centre of green political activity and environmental awareness. And we can't take anything for granted. And we've got a long way to go yet. But the most common question I get asked these days, I went to back to Coffs Harbour High School with Paul the other day to be put into their Hall of Honour. Now, I don't normally say yes to things like that, but it was my old high school, and Paul said, let's go, and we did, and I was so happy because there's 900 brilliant young children, teenagers, at Coffs Harbour High School. And afterwards, I spoke to Judy Henderson, for those of you who know Judy, who was our Greens candidate for the Senate in 1993 here in Tasmania, and would have got there except for the hoax of a bomb being planted on a woodchip bridge up at Black River just 2 days before the election, so-called eco-bomb place. She was there as well because she and I were in the same class back then. But afterwards we went to the environmental group and had a little talk with these kids who knew so much more about the environment than I ever knew. And here's a hope, a great cause for hope. When I was at Coffs Harbour looking out the window at Wales, way back then, 2 girls from both sides asked this question. Bob Brown, why don't you get depressed? Now that's a curler. And thank God I went on to medical school. Because I say, well, that is a very good question. I don't get that so much from adult audiences, but you will get it from youngsters who are looking at what's happening in the world. And my answer to them, well, there's 2 sorts of depressions. One is endogenous and the other is reactive. The endogenous depression is the variety that comes across you and you just can't, it comes out of the blue. Some chemical thing happens here, you need to put chemicals in to fight it off. It's a terrible disease. But reactive depression is quite different. It's reacting to circumstances in life that come across you or upon you. And when a young, bright character looks at what's happening in the world at the moment, it is normal to react by becoming depressed. So what do you do about it? And I say to them, well, you've got only this empirical choice. I was there for 10 years and I didn't like it. I suggest you don't stay there that long. I ran into Dick Jones and a few other people, you see, and that was better than the tablets. Because there was something then, here was a set of rules for the future which made sense in the UTG's new ethic. Organic farming, equality for women, respect for Indigenous culture, education, 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 supporting creativity, and so on. But I say to these young folk, you have to look at the problems on the planet, and when you can't deal with it or affect, what can we do about Syria? Thank God we're not in Syria. You have to put it on, I've been to see Bob Carr about it, they can't. You have to put it on the shelf and deal with the things you can deal with. And that takes some practice. Optimism and pessimism feed on themselves. Take your pick. And having had quite a bit of experience, I'm a true optimist because it's just a lot better and we don't know what's going to happen into the future. What we do know is that people who were unrelenting in their determination to stop something bad happening have succeeded time and time, not always, but they have succeeded time and time again. And can I just tell you a personal local story to embellish that? In 1982, Robin Gray stormed to victory in the Tasmanian elections. May the 13th, I think the date was. We had run a big campaign. I'd announced some 7 years earlier than that I was going. That was huge in the campaign. Never in the media, but in every letterbox in Denison. People got some pretty crude material about that. People took down my posters. That's why I didn't get elected. It was very crucifying for everybody involved in that campaign, the nastiness that was run by those people opposed to us trying to save the Franklin. Our candidates in every seat, Norm Sanders got in, but our other pro-conservation candidates lost. Robin Gray had a walloping majority. He sent the bulldozers into the Franklin on the 17th of July. It was a Tuesday of that year. Labor swapped to being pro-dam. The unions were pro-dam. The Tasmanian Chamber of Industry was pro-dam. Both houses of Parliament were pro-dam. All three newspapers were pro-dam. On and on, we went to Canberra and took a High Court action against loan funds from Canberra being lent to help build this dam, and the High Court threw us out in one day. I went up to see Malcolm Fraser about the dam. He said, go home, it's a state issue. We had a meeting up at Liffey, and under the walnut tree, tried to work out how we were going to make this campaign keep going in the face of this extraordinary wipeout of all our hopes. And one mother, who's a great friend of mine, came up to me and said, Bob, you have no right to be cajoling people into continuing this fight. It is so obviously lost like Lake Pedder. You have got no right to be turning people's minds on this issue. And then when everybody left, I walked around the paddock and up the mountain 3 days in a total state of anxiety. I'd seen what people who felt like they were going to, who didn't have their feet on the ground, led other people into misery. I knew a lot about history, and that was a very telling moment. But decided that while ever that river was running free to the sea, we had a right to fight for its defence. And 18 months later, the High Court of this country determined by 4 judges to 3 that the dam works should stop. And just 2 months ago, the Outside magazine, one of the big adventure magazines of the United States, declared the Franklin and World Expeditions, Tasmanian Expeditions, as the world's premier #1 whitewater expedition, ahead of Tibet and Peru and Chile. So many people were involved in that campaign, but a case of choosing optimism over pessimism. We don't know where the planet's going to. I do know this is an exciting moment in global history. I'm out of the cage, and Christine's tonight up there in Sydney, speaking to the Sydney Institute, the right-wing think tank of Gerard Henderson's, on Afghanistan. We should be out of Afghanistan as well. What a fantastic person of integrity and authenticity is my friend Christine. What a great team of people are in that national parliament, and indeed in our state parliament, and in states around this country, and now working to get parliamentary representation in 83 countries around the world, because Dick Jones and everybody else fighting against Lake Pedder made the move to have a democracy function by having a ecologically based voice in parliaments. And I'll finish with this. Next week, Paul and I are going floating in Tonga, because some friends are bringing a yacht back from overseas, so we'll join them for a little while. And I've been asking Rob White today, do you have ginger, or what do you do if the going gets rough? He didn't think that chocolate-coated ginger did the job just as well. Next month, we're going to Rwanda. Now, Rwanda, post-genocide, is a nascent democracy where the Prime Minister of Rwanda believes that opposition parties should be allowed, provided they have the same policies as the government. It's a slight modification of democracy. The Greens there decided to establish, there are 9 opposition parties who have agreed to that, but the Greens didn't, and they decided to set up a party in 2009, and part of the rules in that country are that you hold a conference of more than 200 people to vote in office bearers and so on before you can be legitimised and counted as a political party, and there's elections coming next year. And they were in the run then to election, and they got 1,000 people to their conference, and they were in the process of electing, with Frank Habanitza, who's the president, we're in the process of electing their office bearers when men appeared in the huge hall in which they were holding this convention, threw chairs, and then proceeded to belt into the audience. You can imagine that happening here with huge poles. They broke legs and broke arms, and people did the best they could to escape from this melee. Just shortly after that, the deputy leader of the Greens was found beheaded. And within a week or so of that, a journalist in the chief newspaper who had reported that the thugs who broke up that meeting were actually paid by the government was assassinated. And Frank Habanitza then, with his family, fled to Sweden because he was told the front page of the newspaper said that he would be killed within 30 days. So I've gotten to know Frank through the Global Greens, and he arrived back in Kigali, the capital, last week to have another go at establishing this political party. Paul and I are going over there to their, what's hoped to be their conference, another go at a conference next month, and I'll give a speech to that conference, a little shorter than this one, but on the same theme, ladies and gentlemen, about our common wealth the planet Earth, as a means of, I now know the Foreign Minister for Rwanda, as a means of giving them some assurance that with an international green figure there, they'll be much safer in holding that conference this time. But it does remind me of how easy we've got it. And it does stun me that he's gone back to Rwanda with his wife and children, that he's got people who are prepared and have got their hands up to be members of this party, and that they're determined to set up after what has happened. So it doesn't matter what we're doing, it seems that it's very mellow, standing up for the Tarkine, risking arrest in the Tarkine or the Franklin or the Forest, or I take my hat off again to Miranda out there and Jenny Webber down in her fantastic Huon Valley Environment Centre. But we have it too easy, considering the goal we want to achieve, which is a safe biosphere for all future generations to come, which is a planet in which our grandchildren look back at us and smile because they know we got out of our way to make the world a better place for them. And when we know that our grandchildren can be smiling about what we did, we can smile ourselves. And this green dictum, which has the imprimatur of Richard Jones written all over it, should be across the doors of that first global parliament, but certainly should be on our parliaments now. Will people 100 years from now thank us for doing this? If we can't say yes to that, we shouldn't be doing it. If we can't say yes, they'll thank us for wrecking the world's biggest whale nursery. We shouldn't be doing it. If they can't say yes, we should be protecting our forests from a marauding Tar-An corporation from Malaysia, which has wrecked so much of the indigenous forest there, then we shouldn't be letting them do it. If we can't say yes, they won't like us, thank us for allowing the Tarkine to be ripped up for short-term profit by a myriad of mining corporations trying to cash in on a resource boom, then they shouldn't do it. And if they can't say, we can't say, yes, they'd like 6 mega coal ports to have put an already stressed barrier reef into a situation where a Mexican expert on corals tells us it will be a heap of rubble by the end of this century, we shouldn't be doing it. And we can follow that strength of spirit, that innovation of mind, that resolution, and that taking it right up to them, that Dick Jones passed on to me. We'll be okay. Takes a bit of thinking about. It might be called courage. I call it common sense. And together, if we galvanise that spirit of future generations and their planet, because it is our planet, ladies and gentlemen, we can turn this world right round to that sustainable world in which we live with each other and with the planet instead of off each other and off the planet. That we all know through common sense should be where we're headed to. I wish you all strength as you think about that. As I said, I'm a bird out of the cage. I'm loving what post-politics I'm able to do. And I thank the Dick Jones Memorial Lecture folk for asking me here tonight and giving me the great privilege to be passing on in such a living and real way that strength, that philosophy and that optimism that Dick Jones so many years ago passed on to me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.